Welcome back to Used to Sew, a podcast about sewing machines, sewing history, and sewing culture in the past and present. I am your producer and co-host, Aradia, daughter of your main host, T.R. Kelly, who is here today to talk to you about Artemis II and some tales of childhood sewing. This episode's purpose is to reflect on the subversive and creative power of sewing over history and over a lifetime. Unfortunately, we were cut short by mysterious technical difficulties, so the episode is a bit shorter than usual, and we do apologize for that. In the time since this episode was recorded, Artemis II has successfully completed the astronaut return process. I believe we were both watching it live as it happened because, re-entry is a seriously dangerous part of a mission like this. Punching through the atmosphere in either direction is the most intense part, really. Space is tough, but getting in and out of space is perhaps tougher. But in this case, the re-entry seemed to go textbook, and the astronauts were recovered with ear-to-ear grins, and nothing I've casually kept up with since suggests anything other than positive results on initial review for the whole process. Other topics we cover in the episode are our first sewing attempts as kids, how those creative desires change over our lives, and some selected sections of a book TR has been reading that is called This Long Thread, Women of Color on Craft, Community, and Connection by Jen Hewitt.
First off, welcome to Used to Sew. Second off, I want to acknowledge that there's crap going on in the world, but in the immortal words of Sting, when the world is running down, you make the best of what's still around. And that is this podcast. So here we go. We can't control everything that's happening in the world, but we can control our reactions to it. And it is okay to hit the off switch and go in your sewing room and just relax for a while, okay? So here we are. And there's all kinds of other cool things going on. Mainly Artemis!
The moon! We've done it! We've gone around the moon, the farthest, and the pictures, and the It's beautiful.
I've been just obsessing on it. I've had the live stream on, and even my brother has had the live stream on his big team. He's out there working on something, then he goes in to see what's going on. Like, I had no idea you were into this stuff. So that's kind of fun. A little family bonding over space. He doesn't remember all the Apollo and stuff like I do because he's a little younger. So I want to just right off the bat here read a thing from astronaut Karen Nyberg. She's retired. I think she was a shuttle astronaut, and she's also a quilter. She's got a great feed on Facebook. So this is astronaut Karen Nyberg speaking here. Yesterday, I spent hours watching the Artemis II lunar flyby. There was something really powerful about it. So many people working together towards something bigger than themselves. You could feel it in the voices, in the moments, in the reactions from people watching. That's what space exploration can do. It shows what's possible, and it has a way of bringing people together. I've seen that up close. As Artemis II returns to the moon, I'd like to share the 2 quilts from the Next Giant Leap Lunar Quilt Block Challenge celebrating the Artemis program. Lunar Quilt, Tapestry of Collaboration, brings together blocks from each of the 50 states, D.C., and Puerto Rico. Lunar Quilt, The New Horizon, is made from 62 student-created blocks, each one a different vision of exploration. So there's 2 quilts here. One is 52 blocks from all the states, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And the second one is 62 blocks made by students. It's really cool. I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes because there's all these quilt blocks that various space stuff on them. People have interpreted their own, like, what is this going to look like? The only thing holding them all together is dark blue fabric. We're going to have our space background in there. But just the fact that you can take anything and make a quilt out of it. So astronaut Karen Nyberg's a quilter, and she goes, hey, let's make a block challenge, but let's make it space. I thought that was such a cool idea because in the old days, quilting was a collaborative effort too. People sitting around doing all those tiny little stitches. Da, 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 da. So you think about how many people were involved in sending this thing out to the moon. And yes, I was sort of dozing during this part, but they had a little episode on the suits and making the suits. And I actually heard a sewing machine running. I need to find out. I was dozing off during the live feed before they actually launched even. So yeah, sewing in space. And what are the astronauts wearing right now? You've been watching them, right? What do you think of what they're wearing right now in the capsule?
I mean, I haven't been paying that much attention to what's inside the capsule. I've been much more interested in the pictures of what's outside the capsule.
Oh, well, okay. They're wearing really basic khaki type pants with a black polo shirt and a belt and these cool little socks. They look like IT nerds at your, it's just like, there's nothing astronaut except for that Christina's hair is floating. That's, that always gives it away.
The floating hair is always a giveaway. No, I do remember seeing a brief bit of video where they were talking about how cold it was. And
yes,
the one guy who doesn't have any hair was like, I took my beanie off for this interview and now I want my beanie back. Like, I'm very cold.
I was wondering about that.
Because, he has no hair. So
he has no hair at all, which is, very handy in a zero-G environment. But if it's cold, yeah. But yeah, just to me, it's like, what are they wearing? Now, I knew about the little socks, but, who figured all that out? Who planned the fabrics? And I'm sure that everything's very stretchy because the way they have to move around in there. And this is sort of related to sewing, but not really. It's about snacks and sewing. I was watching them talking about all this serious stuff, and they're floating around in the cabin, and they're doing things on their, this and that and the other. And then a jar of Nutella floats by. Just
relatable.
a jar of Nutella floating by. It's like, okay, it didn't even need special packaging.
The cabin Nutella, as one does.
Yeah, it didn't even need special space packaging. It goes perfect just like it is. It's not falling out or doing anything. It was just the funniest thing ever.
Nutella, ready for space.
Ready for space. I don't think that was a paid product placement. I want to know which one of the astronauts says we got to have Nutella. Do you know about Rise, little plushie?
No.
You don't know about Rise? Okay, this is really sewing related, people. Rise is the name of the ZGI. What the hell's that? Zero Gravity Indicator. Every space mission ever has taken with them a little plushy toy that just sits. And when it starts floating, the astronauts know they've reached zero G because they're all strapped in. Otherwise, how are they going to know, right? And everything else in the cabin is strapped down for safety. But once the little plushie starts floating, the ZGI, the Zero Gravity Indicator. So in the past, it's been stuff like Beanie Babies. Yeah, it's been stuff like Beanie Babies or other, approved, no parts are going to fall off kind of stuff. For this mission, along with the quilting challenge, there was a challenge to design a ZGI for the mission. To design a little plushie that would go up in Artemis and be the thing. And so this, I think he's an 8-year-old kid, was the winning person. And it's a little about softball shaped thing. And it looks like a moon. It's got all this neat imagery on it. But it's so cute.
That's adorable.
It's like, all right, somebody needs to put out a pattern for this so we can all sew them. I want to make one. It has like the earth and stars. It's just the way he designed it was just graphically very well done. So I wonder who sewed the prototype, because I don't know that the kid sewed the prototype. I think he just designed it. But anyway, watch for these in stores near you or patterns or something, because it's going to be the latest. Oh, I've got to sew one of those. They're so cute. Kids sewing. This is an 8-year-old kid, and they said, when they interviewed him, he's definitely neurospicy, smart kid, right? Took up the challenge and designed a thing. It's a male kid. This is not something like when I was, if somebody would have had that contest when I was in school, it would have been all the girls in home ec would design it, right? Home ec, what's that? Kids sewing. Today, I'm going to just kind of talk about kids sewing. Like home ec. Like, where did we go wrong, and what is Gen Z doing about it? Stay tuned. So, kids sewing. I want to ask all you out there in Used to Sew Land, in your clubhouse. Okay, just think with me for a minute. When did you first want to sew something? When did you as a kid go, God, I want that? Might have been, for a lot of kids, it's a costume. It's some kind of a cape they want. And I'll never forget it. I was 4. And for some reason, we had this yellow pillowcase, and I just loved it. And I said, Mom, can I make something out of that pillowcase? And Mom's at the kitchen table writing a letter to one of her sisters and smoking cigarettes. Oh, sure, honey, here's the scissors. Now, remember, my mom doesn't sew, so there's no good scissors. There's just the scissors.
Right.
So I got out a pair of my pants, and I set this pillowcase on the floor in the front room, on the rug. And I set a pair of my pants on top of that. And I took one of my dad's big Sharpie markers and traced around my pants and then cut out that line. And then I threaded the needle all by myself. I knew how to thread a needle. And I sewed the one side up, and then I sewed the other side up, and then I sewed the seam between the legs up. I put them... What? They won't even go above my knees. What's the problem here? Well, they won't even come off the floor is the first problem because you've sewed them to the carpet. So we go and we snip a little piece of the carpet. We snip a little piece of the carpet out, stand up right on top of the black Sharpie marker stuff that had dripped through into the carpet as well. Mommy, my pants won't fit. Mom comes running in. Here's me with all this sliced up fabric and the carpet's obviously distressed. I hadn't allowed A, for seam allowance, or B, the fact that humans are 3-dimensional. They're not flat, right? You can't just trace around a thing and it's not going to work. So I was very, very discouraged by all that. Mom did something to the carpet, so the Sharpie came out. I think she sprayed it with hairspray.
That's very ambitious execution and planning for a little kid, though. I mean, you were young and you made a lot of mistakes, but you were young and you knew the steps in principle.
Yes, that was the first time I ever remember wanting to sew something and actually trying to make it. And of course, it was so frustrating. But for me, it was always costumes. What the heck? I wanted a mustache, of all things. I was trying to make it out of fabric. Another time I wanted big billowy pants like Arabs wear, excuse me, but this was the 60s. And every time it would just end in disaster. I didn't wreck the carpet or anything, but I just didn't, and since my dad only did utility sewing, my mom hated the whole thing. It was all this big mystery. It was this special club. And one of my friends in school, her mom sewed. She's like I've said before, she's the one that made all my costumes for school stuff. And one day I went over to her house. Can we see your mom's sewing machine? Sherry goes, oh, well, we can look at it, but we can't touch it. Okay, so we look in the room, and there it is. I wish I knew what kind it was. All I know is it was kind of greenish white. It might have been a Kenmore. We were looking at the back of it because we could only look in the room. But that's where it happened. That's where sewing happened. Oh, I went home and I said, Dad, where's your sewing machine? Well, it was folded up in his night table because he only used it for darning jeans and stuff like that. And it was a different color blue. But I would no more have assumed to ask to use the sewing machine than ask to use his guitar. Now look at me.
Well, you grew into it eventually.
I grew into it. Those two items were those are the grail. Those are the things, kid, you're 5 years old. There's a guitar and there's a sewing machine and you can't touch them now, but just wait. Well, just wait till when? Just wait till junior high school. Okay, now I'm 11. Home economics. What is that? Cooking and cleaning and personal care and sewing. Oh, boy. Do we get to use sewing machines? Yes, look at them. There they are. There's 20 matching green Kenmores. I was so excited. I'm a kid that hated school. I was that little kid that got bullied all the time. There's nothing fun at school but sewing machine. Well, I've told the story about that before, and I loved it, and blah, meow, and my friend Laura hated it, and I got to make a mouse because I wouldn't wear a skirt. But that was my first experience making things with a sewing machine and doing it right, because there was a mentor there. Her name was Phyllis. I don't remember her last name. The teacher. And learning how to follow a pattern. Wow. Okay, that really demystified a lot of stuff. I hadn't really grokked that, all the things, little tools you need. Wow, I came out of home ec just, all right, I'm ready to sew stuff. I just didn't have a sewing machine. Damn. Remember, Mom doesn't sew. And by this time, Dad's gone, and he took his sewing machine with him. Mom didn't want the sewing machine. Okay, there we go. So my aunt gave me a sewing machine. I've told you guys about that. It was a 192K, but I couldn't figure out how to use it. Undeterred, I just kept sewing things by hand, and I got pretty good at it, to the point of I was making my own shirts in high school. When you're a poor kid and you can't afford the stuff in the store, what do? Well, you invent your own style. That was my thing. I just invent my own way of doing stuff. Because what else are you going to do? It's like, if you want to sew something, well, hey, man, I'm creative. I can sew my own stuff. And people started coming up with funny nicknames for me at my second high school because of the way I dressed. But they were grudgingly admirational. People would call me like the gypsy or the Ayatollah or whatever ethnic thing I sort of resembled that day, according to how the scarves and the skirts were tied on.
Sure.
I know a lot of kids, like, did you want to, I know you made your own graduation, 8th grade graduation dress, but before that, did you ever want to make you had to make stuff at Waldorf, but did you ever get an idea that there was something you wanted to make? I wasn't around, damn shit, hell, I made your costumes when you were little, but in that middle period, where did you start wanting to, have your own look?
Figuring out my own look has kind of been more of a adulthood thing. The first thing I wanted to make was doll clothes, because I had all of my Barbie dolls, but most of those were acquired secondhand, so they usually came without clothes. So acquiring Barbie clothes was this whole other journey. And I think that was the first thing that I independently wanted to make and struggled with making, was garments for my dolls. And then I had an American Girl doll later that I kind of also wanted to make clothes for, but it was at that point I had enough, discretionary spending money as a small child that I could buy, an outfit and just enjoy having the correct outfit. As far as wanting to make things for myself and style them for myself, that really didn't happen until adulthood. Waldorf just did so much dictating of what creativity I was going to do that it didn't really occur to me to deploy it myself until I was, a few years out of that. The first thing I sewed with Waldorf was a bag. And I still do like being able to put together a quick bag for stuff. That was the first actual, it was still hand sewing at that point, but that was transitioning from the crochet and knitting fiber crafts into, now we have sheets of fabric and we're going to put them together. It was still a hand sewing project, but I still have that bag, actually. I still put stuff in it. And I like making bags. They're handy to be able to just whip together.
Is this like a drawstring type bag?
Yeah, it was a drawstring bag. Yeah, and I embroidered a decoration on the front, so it's very, I actually think we dyed the fabric, embroidered the design, finger knit a drawstring, and then sewed it up. Yeah, that was my first, they let us do fabric stuff. But yeah, as far as my own style, that's really something I'm still coming into at this point in my life, in my mid-30s.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a lifelong deal. Think of your mom in her 30s and 40s with flaming orange hair and wild clothes, and I'm kind of much more subdued looking now. Part of that is that I've retired from live music, but I think our style is something that kind of follows, as I don't know. I don't know anybody that is still wearing the same, well, now wait a minute. There are some people that just never change. I'm thinking of the jeans and band t-shirt sort of guy here. read from this here book. This book is called This Long Thread: Women of Color on Craft, Community, and Connection. And I've had this for a while, and it's full of all kinds of cool essays, but this one seemed to really kind of fit in with the topic today. Eyeballs on here. Okay, this is international style icon. This is actually someone who's a well-known designer now, and her name is Sonia Phillip. So the interviewer is Jen Hewitt. Jen says, I was just learning to sew clothing when I took your sewing class for your dress number 1 pattern. But at what point did you, Sonia, start sewing? Okay, so this is Sonia. I took a needlework class in 6th or 7th grade. I know I sewed before then because my mother had a sewing machine. But that needlework class was my first memory of actually having to sit down and do a project with the expectation of doing things from start to finish. One of my school assignments was to make a pillow. I wanted to make a pillow that was shaped like a pencil. I was trying to use fusible interfacing, and there was going to be a stripe on it. I didn't turn the edges under. It looked hideous. Then my mother helped me, which meant she ended up doing most of it for me. It looked wonderful, but it was just a clear distinction of that what I did didn't work. And then the project got taken over by my mother, and then it looked right. I remember the feeling of, well, I'm glad it looks this way, but do I really have ownership of this? Did I make it myself? No, I didn't. It was finessed. That experience also helps inform my own teaching style. I'm not going to do things for people. I will show them how. I liked fashion just as any teenager trying to figure out who they are likes fashion. But I think I had this feeling that I was not capable of executing the ideas that I had, making them look like the pictures in my head. That continued through my 20s. My mom gave me her sewing machine. I still have it. It would sit in the closet most of the time, and then I would take it out, and I would do things like make a Halloween costume. That's pretty classic, right? I lived in these small places where I never had a space dedicated to sewing. Because even if you have the machine set up, if you don't have a cutting table or an ironing board, it's going to make it difficult. It might not take a lot of time compared to, say, knitting or weaving, but it takes a lot of space. So then the interviewer asks her, Sonia, why had you convinced yourself? So she has gone through this whole thing where she got sidetracked onto knitting. Okay, then we get back to the sewing here. Why had you convinced yourself that you couldn't sew? Sonia says, I think it's because I had had enough disasters.
I mean, sometimes you got to change mediums to just refresh the everything.
Yeah.
Etch a sketch your brain, start over.
Yeah. We got an old sofa, and I decided to sew a slipcover. That was an ambitious thing, and I made it. But I didn't finish any of the inside edges, so the first time it got washed, all the threads inside unraveled. And we knew a woman who was an incredible seamstress, and she would sew her daughter's birthday dresses. I had a daughter, so I thought, I'm going to sew her birthday dress. I sewed her a dress, and I was able to get it onto her head, but not off again. I had to cut her out of it.
Oh,
That reminds me of my mom trying to sew my mouse costume. Okay, these were all the moments when I proved to myself I couldn't sew. First the pencil pillow, then the birthday dress. I made peace with the fact that I was lacking something, maybe the patience to sew. Also, I think I was convinced to this day that my mother's sewing machine was cursed. It was a finicky thing that would always have tension issues. Now, this is the interviewer talking here. Back to the person. I'm convinced that inanimate objects absorb stuff from us. I don't know where it comes from, but I do think there's something to be said for a thing that is unlucky. I, too, have a sewing machine that I got when I was 13, and it was a workhorse. It's the machine I learned to sew on, and then it just decided to die. I've tried to revive it a few times. I'm convinced the machine was telling me I've taken you as far as I can, and it's time for an upgrade. Oh, my God, I have so much. This is TR talking. I have so much issue with that. Oh, it just died. Okay, so back to Sonia. Yeah, it's time to pass the baton. I found a sewing machine on the side of the road. I was out driving and thought that looks like a sewing machine case, and I stopped the car. The sewing machine only went at half speed, but that was perfect for me. Probably 50% of the dresses for my project 100 Acts of Sewing were made on that machine. And then I took a sewing class with Cal Patch. That's a person. Just her style of teaching and the way she explained things made it clear to me that I knew a lot more about sewing than I thought I did. I thought that I couldn't sew and I didn't know how and I'd never learn. She demystified it, putting the pieces together, drafting patterns, constructing garments. But there's a bigger story behind that class, right? Yes, there is. I was frustrated with finding clothes to wear. I had 2 or 3 kids by then. I can't quite remember. I think it was between the second and third child. I didn't care what I was wearing, didn't pay attention to how I looked, and went, this is comfortable. A kid's going to burp on it. I don't care. Then she joins a group of people online that are like upcycling. She discovers upcycling. Mm-hmm. This is right sort of in the aughts, sort of the beginning of the sort of visual internet, like Flickr. She's talking about a Flickr group. And so all these people are sharing clothes. I think we convince ourselves that we can't do something and we butt up against it. Even though doing it would open up avenues and expand things. We close ourselves off because it intimidates us. So I took Cal's class. It was a basic pattern drafting class and we learned how to draft a skirt. The class was on Saturday. Monday, I went out and bought the materials, drafted a pattern, and made the dress. It was a little too big at first, so I redid it. And then I got my muslin to where it was like, okay, this looks good. The muslin, remember, is the practice garment. Then I cut into the fabric that I had previously deemed too special to cut. It was this beautiful black and white fabric, and I thought that if I touched it, I'd mess it up. But I was like, I can do this now. And she did. I made that dress. I had a studio outside the home of time. One of my studio mates had a mirror. I went over to her space and looked at myself for the first time with the dress on. It's cheesy. I described that moment as the clouds parting, the ray of light shining, and I had made this simple dress. It was my eureka moment of I made this. I will wear it. All my hopes and wishes and dreams have been realized. That was on Monday. By the end of the week, I had made 4 dresses.
Beautiful.
And she talks about a lot of other things, about how she became a designer. But this, mark ahead here. It's interesting to me that with sewing, the mark of a fine garment or a good garment is the one where indications of the garment being handmade are minimized or erased. So you hide things. You hide the hem by doing a blind hem. It's unusual to me that the goal is to eliminate the evidence of the maker's hand, where to me, that is the most interesting part.
Yes.
The clothes that you make do not need to look like what's hanging in the stores because those are designed to be made on an assembly line. They are designed to be made, to be cut in the most economical way. What works for a ready-to-wear garment does not necessarily work for the home sewer. So why are you, the home sewer, trying to achieve that? My God, we've talked about that, haven't we?
Yes. What an eloquent way of summarizing the whole thrust of that third pillar of our podcast.
Yeah, like those, fast fashion or even anything that's ready to wear has been optimized to make a profit for the manufacturer. That's it.
Going back to Triangle and farther.
Yeah. The interviewer goes on here. I also think that it's many ways undervaluing the labor that goes into those ready-to-wear clothes that are in stores. That you, as a novice, think you can come in and do the work that someone who's been doing it for 40-plus years a week can do. So what she's saying here is comparing your stuff, your homemade stuff, to stuff of somebody who's been sewing on a line in a factory for 40 years. And their stuff is going to look machine made and perfect because that's the goal. So I think that's one of those weird assumptions that we often make. Oh, it looks, I used to know this Bernina dealer who would be really down on people if their clothes looked homemade. Oh, the loving hands at home look. I'm sorry she was a Bernina dealer, but it just went along with the stereotype in the early 80s. But now I go to St. Vinny's and I'm flipping through the racks. Okay, forget finding anything made by a union. Is there anything here homemade? And once in a while I'll come upon, this is definitely somebody made this. And there's, if you're a sewer, you can tell. Not just the absence of tags or too much serging. Hand stitching, dead giveaway. Nobody not even the poor people in India hand stitch anything anymore. They've got machines figured out for even putting on sequins and stuff. Okay, and then this is the last thing from this interview. Making your own clothes instead of buying your clothes is deeply subversive, because when you're buying your clothes, you're trying to fit into whatever is out there. When you're making your own clothes, you're actually making clothes for who you are, what you have. You're making your clothes for you, for your body. That's it, right there.
Yeah.
Before ready to wear, there weren't sizes. Everybody had clothes made to fit them, unless they were like we talked about enslaved people and sailors and railroaders who would be issued a set of one size fits all by their employer, and then they would have to figure out what to do. But for your average people, here's mom sewing for the kids. Well, come here, kid, and she takes a string and measures. There wasn't even measuring tapes, really. You measured people with strings and knots and stuff.
Right. Yeah. You had your own kind of custom flexible yardstick thingamajiggy that you used habitually. And that was that. And there you have it. Another series of loosely organized tangents around Nutella, quilts, childhood sewing disasters, and adult sewing successes. We were unfortunately cut off from finishing our topics by a technical difficulty that we still haven't fully identified, but I hope that this short episode still satisfied your Sunday morning crafting chatter needs. As I mentioned in the opening of the episode, Artemis II ended on a high note, with the perfect and safe landing of the astronauts in the Orion capsule. I just looked up an article from NBC that was published today about how the capsule performed during re-entry, because if you will recall, if you're a serious nerd, there was an issue with the heat shield on Artemis I that they compensated for on Artemis II with a steeper re-entry angle. So I think that was one of the biggest questions for casual fans of the whole process like me, and I'm pleased to have just read that the heat shield performed as expected with no issues. Of course, it is being extensively documented. They literally had divers taking pictures of the capsule even before the astronauts were recovered. And it is worth noting that Artemis III will have a totally redesigned heat shield, because that is the magic of slow, incremental iterations by NASA. And as much as I love all of the space stuff, I think my favorite part of this episode was the part near the end, where there was that quote, "Making your own clothes is subversive." Because I feel that in my bones. But sometimes it just feels like wishful thinking, especially when I'm failing to do all of the things. And it's just nice to hear that from an external source who is convinced on much more solid ground than just me with my own navel gazing. I might go in fits and starts, but it's subversive no matter how much or how little I achieve by any arbitrary point in the timeline. But also, I hope to make it a more regular part of my life over time. As a reminder, we are unofficially sponsored by Stagecoach Road Vintage Sewing Machine. You can reach them at srvsew@gmail.com. Follow us on social media and YouTube, and you can best support us by sharing the podcast with your friends. You can even get ad-free episodes by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/used2sew. Thank you for listening to us here at Used to Sew. We always welcome your additions, corrections, and feedback in general. Please reach out to us via email at usedtosew@gmail.com. Used to Sew is a production of Fox and Raven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Raven Media, visit our website at foxandravenmedia.com.